Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Genre Guys, and I am here today to tell you all to enhance your calm. Did that give it away? No?
No.
No? Okay, how about the three seashells?
That'll do it.
That'll do it? All right. We are talking today about the classic, the incredible, the genius, the unbridled genius, the prescient film, Demolition Man. And I kind of wish it wasn't so prescient, to be honest. In our back channel discussion just before we started recording this, Lou, you mentioned that you were a little taken aback by just how predictive it was of the future.
Where did you find this picture? Do you see the name of the site that you're on?
I know.
And where that sentence cuts off? The LAPD, their methods are. This is about a cat, right? Just to be clear.
Yeah.
We don't give financial or pet advice on this channel.
No.
But anyway.
I'll put that away. Well, it was one of the only posters that I could find that actually was, of a decent size. But all that to be said, yes, we are talking about Demolition Man. We are talking about this underrated gem, I would say. Wouldn't you guys agree with me on that? Maybe yes, possibly.
Lorn, I don't know what you think. I don't. I didn't remember it as being quite so huge effects-wise as it turns out that it is, because I hadn't seen it in several years. But especially the very opening where there's this massive, massive, massive scene with fire and smoke and bombs and guns, and it's just to set up the story. And supposedly the guy that wrote the script, or at least that part of it that added it to the story, he said, and I think it's a fun line, he said, unless you've seen Kansas, you can't understand how wild Oz is. And that's kind of, this is a story not only about science fiction and about crime and about social commentary, but it's largely about time travel in a way, because it's about suspended animation and people coming back from prior times. So there you go. Anyway, I'm going way ahead of the game here.
No, not at all. So, and it's funny because your point about time travel, it hits the mark. This movie, as I was watching it, and I saw it when it came out. I saw it again. It's been sort of, a film that I've enjoyed watching once in a while as just sort of a comfort film. But it wasn't until this watch through that I really tied it up to H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. There are a lot of themes in this film which are very, very similar to the ones that he introduced in those books, including the Morlocks, the Eloi, the Man Out of Time, and so on and so forth. So it was almost like a 90s version of The Time Machine, I would say. But all that to be said, let us enter into the part of the show where we talk about the movie itself. Ooh. What do you think, Lorn? Do you want to give it a go? Give a rundown of what happens in the film?
Well, I don't think it's actually all that complex a plot, so there's not really a whole lot to go into. The gist of the thing is that in 1996, you're seeing the worst version of dystopian LA that you could imagine, which is kind of typical of these 90s action flicks. You have John Spartan going to apprehend the worst criminal known to man, Simon Phoenix, who has hijacked a bus and taken 30 hostages in this building, and Simon Phoenix has ordered the mayor and everybody else to stay out. So naturally, John Spartan takes a helicopter and jumps in on a bungee cord and tries to apprehend Simon. He believes that the building is empty except for Simon. They cased the joint. They found only 8 co-conspirators. In the process of apprehending him, the entire building goes up in an enormous fireball that collapses the entire building. And when the police arrive to pick up Simon Phoenix, it's revealed that there's 30 bodies there. and John Spartan is blamed for not getting these hostages out, for not being aware that they were there. He is sentenced, along with Simon, to cryostasis and behavioral modification. And then about, it was 36 years in the future, whereas Simon was supposed to have an indefinite sentence, and Stallone was supposed to have a chance of parole at, 42 years, something like that?
30, 40, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. In any case, for some reason, Simon Phoenix does come up before the parole board. And when he does, he essentially assaults the assistant warden, steals his eye, uses it to access secure areas of the building, and escapes. And in this version of the future, everything has gone incredibly PC. After a great earthquake that took place in 2010, when all of the big one, the one that they've been predicting forever, San Francisco and LA basically collapse. In the aftermath, they have to rebuild society. What was once these two separate communities now becomes the community of San Angeles, and they build a utopian society in which nothing unexpected ever happens. You have no cursing, no salt, no weapons,
no sex,
no profanity. It is very much a sanitized, ultra PC society. And
anything bad for you has been outlawed, is the way they said.
Pretty much. And there's no physical contact. You don't shake hands. You don't high five. Off-color jokes would be outlawed. It's pretty much.
It is society made wimpy. Let's put it that way.
It's sort of picture if we continue on the path that we're on, maybe about 5 to 10 years in the future. But what they realize is that the police have no understanding whatsoever of how to contain somebody who is a violent criminal. They don't know how to deal with this. And so they decide to go back and unfreeze the guy who caught him last time. And the plot kind of takes off from there. The gist of the thing is that there is a reason why Simon got out. And he has, through the rehabilitation capabilities of this cryostasis, gained a whole lot of abilities that he didn't have before. And part of the mystery of the show is, why did that happen and what's really going on here? So,
and we should say that's Wesley Snipes. And of course, the Demolition Man, the cop, is Stallone. And it's at that point, it becomes very much a fish out of water movie and is very funny. And the young cop, who's an expert on the past, or I think she is Sandra
Bullock.
Sandra Bullock. And Sandra Bullock, yeah.
And so in a way, John Spartan's been her hobby to study these evil times from before. And so she becomes his chaperone in a way within the police department, because not everybody's pleased that they did this, that they brought this guy back, because they all think that those people are, cavemen and ridiculous. And turns out you need a tough guy once in a while if you have a tough guy to fight. Yeah, meanwhile, there's an underground. That's Dennis Leary, the comedian. It was one of the first movies I think that he made. Is Edward Friendly, and his people are living under the streets of the city, trying to make it more like it used to be, not in a bad way, but in individual rights and choices. Because in this homogenized future, everything has been homogenized into one. And for example, the winners of the great franchise wars, every restaurant is now Taco Bell.
And it's a upscale fine dining place.
Yes, and but also, though, one of the things that's supposed to be not healthy and therefore is banned is spicy food. So it's probably a pretty homogenized Taco Bell, to say the least. Interestingly enough, when they made the deal, McDonald's and Burger King were both approached first, but they decided they didn't want to be a part of this. But Taco Bell was happy to be involved. However, Taco Bell, which had many restaurants back then, of course, in America, didn't have much of a penetration in Europe at all. And therefore, Taco Bell, you may or may not know, is also owned within a thing called Yum Brands. I'm not sure if Yum was around then, but it was Pepsi-Cola, owned all these chains. And they did, of course, have Pizza Hut overseas. So in the European release of the movie, it's not Taco Bell, it's Pizza Hut.
And on that note, I had forgotten about the fact that it was Taco Bell. I bought this film on Amazon, and I don't know if it was an Amazon Canada thing, but it was the Pizza Hut version. And,
yeah.
And I don't know if you guys saw the Taco Bell version or the Pizza Hut version on this watch. But,
Taco Bell.
Okay, so I'm watching this thing, and every time they say Pizza Hut, it completely desyncs from Stallone's mouth.
And they changed the logos on the fancy Pizza Hut restaurant and everything else. Or Taco Bell restaurant to Pizza Hut.
Did they change the food that was served?
They did not. They kept food.
But all you ever see of the food is that funny little cuisine monster, sort of 3 little bites on 3 little chips that could be anything really.
I mean, this thing right here.
I mean, they don't bring out chalupas and tacos and all that stuff in the movie, so yeah, that's the shot.
But there are tortilla chips, so there's at least.
Well, yeah, okay. But I mean, I think they knew that going in that they were going to have something relatively neutral because they were going to have to make that change.
I mean, I've seen weirder pizza. I'm not gonna.
Well, that's true. That's true. But and of course, there's no such thing as exchange of fluid sex. Oh my God, that's scandalized. It's all mental, right?
That was hilarious.
And anyway, so the battle goes on between the good guys and the bad guys, and eventually the good guys win. And that's not a spoiler. That's movies. But the point is that the movie balances between being a really brilliant satire and kind of cautionary dystopian tale and being a knockdown, drag out, super shooting, banging, booming thing. There's a museum because, of course, the bad guy, Snipes, wants to get a gun, and there are no guns because the police only have like shock wands to knock people out.
Like stun batons.
But there is a museum of those evil, awful days, which is where all the guns are. So he goes into this magnificent set, I thought, of this museum where you stand on a glass floor and look down and you see a street that they uncovered after the earthquake of what things used to look like. And anyway, everybody shoots everybody and lots of things blow up in good action movie style.
And the beauty of this is that these type of movies used to be a dime a dozen. You'd get them all the time in the summer.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a beautiful representation of what that era was like. My son's a big fan of the 80s, and so he was real excited to watch this because he thought this was going to be an 80s movie, and I had to tell him, actually, it's 93. But even so, they were still making them right up until the end of the decade there.
And there's a little factoid I discovered that I think is just like all the other things in this sort of very cautionary about the future. We've told you pretty much how the movie goes down. We know they were making, as you said, a dime a dozen of these big action movies with either Stallone or Schwarzenegger or other people. By the way, there's a great Schwarzenegger joke in here. Talk about being prescient. The policewoman played by Sandra Bullock, her name is Lenina Huxley. So it's Lenin and Aldous Huxley as far as futurism and socialism. But she said she studied things at the Schwarzenegger University. And Stallone looks at university. Well, the President Schwarzenegger Library. But of course, after this movie is when he actually ran and won in a recall for governor of California.
Yeah.
And they make a point of saying they passed an amendment because, of course, in the Constitution, you have to be American born to run for president. But anyway, where was I going with all that? I know I had a point. Oh, the point was this. Here is a movie that, given the right amount of money and some people with experience, that on the surface, not the subtleties of the script and the satire, but on the basic story and the effects and the budget, that you could churn them out. Truly, they were churning them out. Maybe not as big as this, but pretty much. And yet, here is a little line from Wikipedia, quote, "The script had been in development for 6 years before filming finally began." My point being, what do we keep saying about all these Disney epics that go way over budget and way over schedule and way over everything because they keep having to do rewrites and changes and rewrites and changes? If you wait till the script really works and you wait till you got the casting really down, that stuff doesn't happen. They knew it back then. Why don't they know it now?
It's a really good question. And it's funny. This film, you touched on it before. jumps between a standard action feature affair, but it also does have some pretty biting social commentary. It like they did churn these out. I remember when they've churned these films out, but at the same time, I don't quite remember them being so on the ball, I suppose.
It's not as funny now as it was
No,
then.
it really isn't.
Yes.
It really isn't.
And to me, one of the not so surface, but certainly subtly in there things it talks about that are sadly in many ways true, is that if you build up enough fear in people, they will surrender their rights for the protection that you're offering. And when you think about it, that message, which is very prominent in this movie, is where the whole beep bop boop Gina Carano thing came in, right? So there's a lot of parallels to the real thing here. And of course, there's some that are just silly. For example, the famous 3 seashells, which if you don't know about it, I'd almost rather you discovered it watching it. But just know that the guy that wrote it was literally at somebody's house and they had a bag of seashells in the bathroom as decoration. And he thought, oh, there's an idea. It also says that the guy who wrote it, the area he was thinking about to symbolize this whole world of future cleanliness and not being the real world as we know it, but turning into the real world, believe it or not, was CityWalk at Universal Studios in Hollywood.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he was using as his model. And he originally pitched this movie as an action movie version of Woody Allen's Sleeper. So there's an interesting comparison too. And it says he used to wait in line at the NBC studios to go see the Johnny Carson show. And he wrote a lot of the script on index cards while he was waiting in line. So, also involved is an interesting fellow, Stuart Baird, who is the editor, is a guy who went from being an editor to a director of some pretty big pictures, notably, movies like this. He directed Executive Decision, which, if you haven't seen it, is a marvelous, marvelous show about terrorists and hijacking and all that. U.S. Marshals, which you'll remember is the sequel to The Fugitive, which also has somebody we saw in this movie in it, and Star Trek Nemesis. But he was the editor of Lara Croft Tomb Raider, and he worked on Lethal Weapon 2, and Die Hard 2, and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and later became, a pretty big director. But he started out editing Gorillas in the Mist and a lot of Ken Russell movies, Tommy and Listomania and Valentino and Altered States. So it's always fascinating to me how people cross paths in movies. And if they hit it off, they work together again and again and again. For example, when the bad guy, Wesley Snipes, decides he needs a gang again, he has a list of other guys he knows are frozen that he wants them to thaw out to be his assistants. And so you have this gang of thugs around him, none of whom have any individual lines or of any note. But among those, Jesse Ventura, who at this time was just a wrestling guy who got whatever parts he could before he became more famous and was more a standalone minor action figure. In the gang, and I couldn't pick him out, but he's in there in the credits, so he must be there. In the gang with Dennis Leary, believe it or not, is Jack Black.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Yes, he's in there somewhere. I was shocked because I happened to be watching it on Amazon with that X-ray thing on, and suddenly he popped up on the cast thing as Wasteland Scrap number 2.
That's rich. That's wow.
Yeah. And and then the great humor of this thing, especially is Glenn Shaddix, who people will remember also from Beetlejuice, and he's the associate Bob, assistant to the bad guy, Nigel Hawthorne.
Same hair too, I think.
Yeah, more or less. But anyhow,
but going back to what we were. Oh, sorry. Go on, Lauren.
I was going to say, speaking of people crossing paths and working together several times going forward, is after Wesley Snipes got out of jail for his various issues with tax evasion, Stallone brought him in for one of the Expendables movies. I think it was the third one.
Yeah.
And they've got some great chemistry. You could tell that they were having a lot of fun playing off of each other.
Yes. Yes, they do. And you know, it's funny, the people that they talked about for this movie. I mean, obviously, every action star was under consideration as far as the Stallone part. They talked about, oh, golly, everybody. Stallone said he wanted Jackie Chan for the bad guy, but Chan didn't want to play a bad guy. And Wesley Snipes had turned it down several times. And they talked with him, and he finally decided to do it. But in the meanwhile, everybody was up for this. Oh, also, big part of this movie, and I bet it would have cost a lot more without it, is General Motors, because they used this concept vehicle of theirs called the Ultralight. Right. And they had more than 20 of them that were either the real ones from GM or copies that the film made as the police cars for the San Angeles police. And yet, you know what I said about they worked on it for 6 years to get it right before they started? It still went way over schedule. Stallone got hurt. Heavy rain. One soundstage was damaged in a fire. The production went through 5 assistant directors, and some of the crew had to move on to other things because they already had commitments. So what was supposed to be a 72-day shoot ran to 112.
Wow.
And it still made money. So many of the locations are places that I kept recognizing, not just the convention center downtown, but the apartment building that she supposedly lives in is the Pacific Design Center, or the Blue Whale, as most of us in LA used to call it, because it's a big blue glass building. They actually used the federal downtown prison building as the exterior of the cryo prison. I don't think it was quite finished yet when they shot it. Anyway.
Well, like looking at some of the behind the scenes info on this, Lori Petty was originally cast in the part that Sandra Bullock eventually got, but she was fired after 2 days of filming.
She said she and Stallone did not get along. We can use our own imaginations as to what happened there.
And then Dennis Leary apparently had to undergo a significantly long approval process for his rants before he was included in the script, which yeah, I could see it.
And again, they greenlit this with a production budget of $45 million, which was pretty big in those days. It wound up actually costing $77 million. And with marketing, it came in at 97 roughly, but it still made well over 100. So
it was a 159.1 million at the box office. So pretty darn respectable. And it was respectable enough that, in fact, I don't know if you guys were aware of this, they were talking about making a Demolition Man 2.
Yeah.
The back in 2020, Stallone apparently had said something along the lines of, quote, "Can we get another Demo Man? I think there is coming. We're working on it right now with Warner Brothers. It looks fantastic. So that should come out. That's going to happen." I mean, I guess it didn't happen, and it's probably dead in the water at this point, but I'm not even sure how they'd be able to do that. Once again, it would be, I think, trying to capture lightning in a bottle. I really don't see how you could do a sequel to this.
Yeah, because they really covered the gamut as far as making the future funny for its wimpiness. All of the popular music in this future are TV commercial jingles. I mean, they go to this Taco Bell that is this modern luxury restaurant, and the guy at the piano bar, well, I'm trying to think of which one he was singing. The Jolly Green Giant. Yeah. Coming from the valley of the Jolly. And he's, there in the cocktail bar and everybody's bopping away with the oldies.
Well, it's not that it's popular. It's the only music that's allowed because everything else is offensive in some capacity.
That's right. It's too not wimpy.
Enhance.
This is interesting. Dennis Rodman saw this movie, liked Snipes in it so much. That's when he had his hair dyed and styled the same way as that character.
Oh.
That was the beginning of him dyeing his hair different colors.
Interesting.
But they said Snipes hated it and shaved it off as soon as the filming was over. But
so there were a few things in this film that I thought were. I do want to speak a little bit too, and this is more about the social commentary than it is the action sequences of it. As I was watching this, especially in hindsight of where we are as a society in 2024, I really felt that the quote unquote utopia that's being presented in this film is very much what a lot of, shall we say, those folks on the more progressive bent of things were hoping society would turn out to be. This is the idealized version, I feel, of what they wanted, but just it would never happen. It'll never happen. Like communism, it looks good on paper, but ultimately it's impossible to implement.
Well, and this movie is sending that message. This movie is saying, be careful what you wish for with your perfection, because human beings aren't perfect, and you're gonna hit some bumps in the road. But some of the things in this were impossible to predict, and yet they do. For example, the fact that nobody shakes hands, they just bump elbows. Well, we saw that from COVID, but this is well before anything like that. And of course, shortages of toilet paper, which I guess there wasn't as much of a shortage of seashells if we'd known how to use them.
I wouldn't want to be the guy trying to experiment it to figure it out. It seems like injuries could occur.
Yes, well, or at least injuries of your pride, if not your...
But I think as well, though, there's also the neutering of the police force. Like, you know, there's a line in this movie where they say, after Phoenix goes on one of his murder, death, kill rampages, where they're like, we're police officers. We're not trained to handle this sort of violence, right?
Yes.
And
you know who else is in it who has worked with Stallone since was Rob Schneider, who, of course, was with him in Judge Dredd.
That's true.
One of the scenes that I think is the funniest in the movie is when Simon Phoenix is out and he's accessing the computer and the police surround him, and they're consulting this data pad essentially to try to figure out how do we apprehend this guy. And it's relaying audio instructions. It's like, approach the subject and say in a firm voice, lay down on the ground and put your hands behind your back.
Mm-hmm.
And so he does that. And of course, Simon ignores him. He's like, what do I do now? Says, approach him and say in an even firmer voice, lay down on the sidewalk and put your hands behind your back, or else.
It's like cops learning how to be cops on the job from YouTube videos.
Well, it was like an AI, and like they weren't saying subject, they were saying approach the maniac.
Yes, because anybody who's violent in that world is a maniac, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the brilliance of the movie is actually trying to find that line of, you don't want to have a society that's lawless and full of anarchy, but you also can't have perfect order. You have to figure out where is the middle line that you're willing to accept a certain level of chaos, but also maintain enough order that not everything's on fire.
Yes.
And that's the kind of conversation that we're having every day these days.
And you know, another thing that strikes me, the interactions with the computers in the police station. This was not the master computer giving orders like it is in a lot of these movies. This was not the evil God in the machine. This was just sort of a very utilitarian and simple-minded cyber future. And I thought that was kind of different, you know, from what we see in these kind of films.
It felt like Google watching this. It felt like
yes.
It felt like it was, again, really like you had to kind of stop for a moment and remember that this film was made back in 1993. Because the stuff like the maps, which they are taking for granted in the film, that's stuff that we take for granted now, and just you don't realize that it hasn't been around forever. It was really trippy watching this film, I gotta say.
How old were you in '93, Tommy?
Oh well, you know, I was pushing 40 at the time, and
oh no, you were younger than that, because I was 40.
Because what I remember actually back then was looking up how to travel on MapQuest and then printing out the pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wound up with your own version of those things that, remember the Auto Club used to call triptychs, where they had the long maps that took you turn by turn through where you were going. And also fun are the Sandra Bullock trying to do the expressions from the old days that she doesn't quite get right, you know. Um,
I was going to
Let's
say
go
one.
blow
I
this
realized
guy.
I can't.
and this scene you're seeing on the screen right now, folks, is when they're using these helmets to have a meeting of minds to have sex because, oh God, we don't want to have fluid transfer,
exchange.
as they put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet that box in the back that they come out of looks like a crock pot or a food warming thing for a buffet, you know? Anyway.
I'll give this to the film though. Like, I think you will see the real life version of this within the next 5 to 7 years. I'm sure of it. Like,
Oh, no.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Like, not that it's going to act as a replacement, but as an alternative. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think movies like this will keep that from happening because people will say, what are you going all Demolition Man on me? Don't be ridiculous. I know how that turns out.
Yeah.
I saw the movie.
But even something like, another thing is that you can see in this photo that I have up here, this is Sandra Bullock's room, which kind of looks a bit like, that diner from Back to the Future 2. But what, again, was something that as you're watching this, you just sort of, you take it for granted. Then you have to stop yourself and think, wait a minute, hang on. No, this was a smart home. They were able to call out the lights.
This is the last scene of Carousel of Progress.
Yeah. But this is like a Google smart home, basically, that she's in for all intents and purposes. And that, too, was incredibly, I would say, prescient.
Well, you know what strikes me when you say that? How come it took so long for the real world to get the Nest doorbell and stuff like that? Because that kind of thing has been in movies about the future forever, I mean, phasers and rocket ships to Mars are hard to do, but those simple appliance things, seems like they took a lot longer than everybody expected they would take.
Well, they seem simple, but they're not as simple as they operate. The main thing, I think, was getting the technology down to an affordable level. And that's been the real deal kicker up until recently.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Well, guys,
folks, it seems like we haven't got anything to say, but it's only because in its own weird, wacky, not quite an action movie, not quite a satire, not quite, and certainly a classical Stallone bust 'em up, shoot 'em up. This movie is kind of perfection in the way it takes on the subject of the movie, which is really, as we've said, a kind of serious one, which is what kind of future do you want to have?
What gets me about this film, and what I also think is typical of these types of films, is the fact that, I mean, there's an entire through line in this movie about swearing using this wasn't a PG film, basically, mainly due to the language. Stallone at one point, because he can't figure out how to use the 3 seashells, goes to the monitoring machine, which hands out infraction tickets every time you say a naughty word, and purposely goes on this profanity-laden rant. So he has
get himself some paper
citations to give himself some toilet paper. But the funny thing is, when I was looking up this film and sort of doing a little bit of research on it, like a lot of these not appropriate for children films, they ended up making toys for it. Action figures.
Oh yeah.
Which is wild. And it's in line with things like the Alien franchise having action figures, Predator, Terminator, films that you wouldn't take your kid to, unless you were just absolutely off your rocker. But that was something that I think was really, really funny about that time, is you always had an action figure line, even if the film was something that the intended audience could never actually see.
Well, I mean, back then, it's like kids were always going to movies that they were not really supposed to get into. That was really common. I remember back in elementary school, I had people that were classmates that were talking about all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. So, it was a different time.
There's an interesting little anecdote I'm reading here. We haven't mentioned because, as you'll hear, they more or less mentioned it and then went on and didn't specialize. But there is a subplot of John Spartan being woken up all these years in the future and asking about his family. and being told that his wife, which we didn't even know he had one yet, was killed in the big earthquake. And his daughter, and they talk about, does he want to meet her and find her again, which he does. But then he decides in this world, I would be, the point is, the thing about his daughter goes away. It just gets left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. And some of the producers wanted to put the future that they were going into many, many more years into the future, because they didn't think the world would get this bad in that short amount of time. But then they said, well, if we do that and we have the daughter, she's going to be totally a grown woman, and that's not going to work. So they kept it where it is, which, as we now know, living in more or less that future, is pretty darn close to real and accurate. In other words, they never thought it would get this bad that fast, but they kept it that way to not complicate the timeline with the daughter. And that is why it works so well to me, is the fact that it's so soon. It's not Buck Rogers in the 33rd and a half century,
They're pretty darn close. I mean,
yes.
Auto driving cars. Hello, Tesla, right? It's one of those films where you watch it and you realize that the future they're predicting either has already passed or is going to be coming due shortly. But unlike, say, Back to the Future, this one has so much attention to detail in the environment, in the consistency of things. Like every time someone swears throughout this entire film, that little buzzer goes off and the citation and like, you've been fined this, blah, blah, blah. Like the same, the recording goes off. And like, they do it all the time. Like they don't miss a single beat.
And what about the fact that everybody's got a chip in them?
Yeah.
That is tracking where they are and what they're doing, which is why you might say, well, so what if the box on the wall calls you on your language? Who cares? Because the answer is, all right, they're giving you a receipt, but they're also recording it somewhere that's going to take it out of your bank or your salary or whatever it's going to take it out of.
Yeah, this was a social credit score before that was a thing.
Yes, exactly. And God, there's a lot of depth to this thing that you wouldn't expect. And yet, it is, fair enough, a straight-ahead Stallone action picture. Yeah. The guy with the big muscles beats up the bad guys, and survives vicious assault and all the rest of it.
100%.
And the fact that it's not too far in the future is reflected in another way that makes me it just came to me. The whole bit with the 3 seashells. Uh-huh. If it was way in the future, all of those people from that time would be saying, what do you mean you don't know how to use them? What else would you do? But they obviously know enough to know it's relatively new, and that here's some guy from the sticks who didn't ever learn it while the rest of us did. See how that keeps it closer together? Well, the attitude when what's the name, Rob Schneider, he doesn't know how to use the seashells.
Laughing his butt off.
Not shock, comedy, amusement.
Condescension.
Yeah, well, yeah.
In movie, of course. Well, I'm gonna start off our little round of what we liked and what we didn't like, and I'll say one of the things I didn't like about it was the fact that, as you just pointed out, there was a drop of like a sort of a dropped plot line of Stallone's wife and his daughter, and I found it really interesting that he was basically frozen as an ice cube, and he did say that there was consciousness throughout the freezing process when they should have been just fully blacked out. But at one, like it felt there were a few things that felt very rushed to me, and I get it that it's the makeup of the movie, it's part of this type of film. I don't hold it against it too much, but I'm going to point it out, the fact that one scene he's there talking about his wife pounding against the ice cube that had become his husband, and then maybe 10 minutes later when Sandra Bullock's character is like, let's go have relations, he's like, yeah, let's go do it. So it felt like and then of course forgetting about the daughter altogether. Oh yeah, okay. So it just felt like a really
so fast you don't dwell on that.
Well, yeah, you don't dwell on it exactly, but then you kind of think back and you're like, wait a minute. And then also the Dennis Leary character with his underground society. it felt a little, I mean, it was all messy and dirty and everything. It felt a little too pat in the resolution pat. But again, this is the type of movie it is. You expect that. What I liked about it is something that I appreciate very much now, which I've mentioned like during our talk, is that there are so many things in this film that you don't even realize like that have incorporated. There are so many similarities in present day life to this film that you literally have to stop and think like, wait a minute. Oh yes, that's right. They didn't have smart houses in 90.
And you keep thinking about it after the movie's over.
Yes. So, I mean, I don't think I've seen a more prescient film. I've used that word prescient so many times in this discussion, but I'm really hard pressed to think about another sci-fi film which did such a bang up job of predicting the future as this one.
As a complete future, not just as, for example, was it Hilton that had the hotel at the space station in the original 2001 that you just saw the sign in the background?
Yes.
Not just these little throwaway things of, there's some things that are still the same or whatever, but the attitude of the people. It's a much more savvy, interesting in what it tells and what it doesn't tell, and what it shows and what it implies and what it ignores. There's a lot going on in this thing. And part of the joy of it is that they didn't sacrifice the shoot 'em up action, adventure, explosion side of it because, we got to do our duty to the story. No, it does it all in the same movie. Hard to find.
Yeah, I don't actually have much to dislike about this movie. I'm a fan of all of these movies that came out around this time. These kind of, like I said, throwaway action flicks. They had so many of them, and I love almost all of them. But what kind of thrills me about this discussion is
including a Fifth Element?
Oh, God. Let it...
There are exceptions.
Yes.
But
Battlefield Earth.
What thrills me about the conversation that we're having is we're not talking about it as an action movie. We're actually talking about it as a cerebral exercise.
Yes.
And it's kind of funny because back then, when the movie was coming out, PC had become a thing. People were aware of it. People were aware this could become a problem. And there for a while, politically correct language sort of got rejected. It kind of fell into the background again. But then it roared back with a vengeance, and we've been dealing with a lot of that stuff ever since. The fact that you can take this movie, which, it was funny, and it was kind of a satire. It was a little bit of a cautionary tale, but I doubt if they really thought that this would be something we'd be talking about,
Exactly.
30 years down the line.
These guys created something that they had no clue would ever be this relevant all these years later.
Well, I think. Sorry,
that's kind of what makes it such a fascinating movie.
Yes,
though, is that we're not talking about the action and the explosions and all of that stuff, which is the fun parts of these kind of movies,
which are amazing, folks. That opening sequence.
Yeah.
There's more dynamite than in all 50 war movies you ever saw lately in that one sequence. It's big and it's real, and it's not all animated CGI stuff.
Right. But we're talking about this now because back when this movie came out, this was funny.
Yeah.
Now it's a little bit scary, and that makes it an interesting movie in at least two different ways.
Well, I was going to say, though, just to your point, Lorn, very quickly, they probably didn't know what they were. They probably didn't think that they were going to be this, accurate when it comes to the future predicting. They just took all the trends that they saw at that time and cranked them up to their logical absurdity.
Yes.
And what does it say about us that we've actually followed that route for the most part? Anyway.
Well,
in some ways, I think you could pair this one with Idiocracy. They share a kinship.
Yeah.
Oh, very good point. Yeah.
But see, I think as much as they were looking to entertain us, they were hoping to scare us. But it didn't get scary back then the way it did later because it was seen as funny but implausible. Now we look at it and say, funny and very potentially real. We better make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And when you talked about how it came back with a vengeance, Lorn, I think that's because the people who were always for it thought they were biding their time until we had somehow reached this magical threshold of buying their BS. And we're shocked to discover that no, we weren't. And no, we aren't. And people will stop drinking their favorite brand of beer forever if you do this to them, or stop shopping at their favorite discount mega mart if you do this to them, or start deciding not to go to your movies or your theme parks. They thought they had primed us, dare I say, groomed us to accept right about the time when we were up to our neck and saying, this isn't funny anymore, stop it. Everybody's timing was off.
Yep.
But when they made this movie, they thought, well, let's have some fun with the idea. And if we wake people up a little bit, that's a good thing too.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, though, is that it's Hollywood that made this movie back then. With the sensibility saying this is a bad thing, we probably don't want to do it.
Yeah,
so it's really weird to see how far things have swung now. I mean, because that's the whole crowd that's pushing it.
Yeah, it's sort of like they forgot about it almost. But at any rate, well, guys,
it's one more reason, everybody, that our theme song on this show is get these things and get them on disc and put them in your library, and every 5 or 10 years go look at them again, if not sooner, because you're going to see new things in them that you didn't see when you saw them the first time. Or that you saw and relegated to the, oh, yeah, but it's only a movie. Well, maybe not. Maybe not.
Lou, I don't think you gave us your thing that you liked and thing you disliked on this.
Well, I like the sense of humor, of course. And I like, if you look at all these characters, with all respect to Snipes, who is great in this movie and lets it go and just runs with it, he's a psycho. So what? But Stallone, as crazy as his situation is, as crazy as the thing he finds himself is, he brings reality to this movie in a way that he doesn't often get to do in a lot of his movies of this period and later. For example, this thing he's doing now, Tulsa King. I watched the first season or almost all of it, and it was fun, and it was a great idea, and it was a fish out of water in its own way. But you never believed for a minute he was really a gangster. It was a character. It was a game. This thing, when she goes off in one direction, when Friendly wants to go off in the other direction at the end, he's the Rock of saying, well, hey, guys, let's find a middle way. Let's find a way that we can make this work. And that's not easy to do in a show like this where everything is nuts, where no satire is too far out. They could have gone a lot further and might have on the morality and the sex and the what's good for you and what's not good for you and all those other things. And Stallone brings it back to, hey, guys, that's all fine and good. Meanwhile, I got a bad guy to kill. Let's get on with the real job of the movie here. He keeps the plot on course in spite of all the obvious and enticing distractions to go off course or to go off into tangents too heavily. As far as not liking, I can't think of one overt thing not to like. I really can't. And I'm not saying that because I think it's a masterpiece. It's not. But so many good little we didn't talk about the black guy that used to be on the force with him, who's still there, still working, remembers him. That relationship didn't have to happen for the plot to move forward. But again, it rooted it all. It made it all a cohesive world that hangs together. These people have some really, really, really strong storytelling sense in both writing and performance and direction that transcends even the script, that transcends even the situation.
It was a really nice touch, that particular scene when he sees
everybody's a family. This is a feature film that in many ways works more like an ensemble sitcom.
Yeah.
You've got this guy and that girl and this person and that person, and they're all in the same universe, and you believe it. You don't believe that somebody said, well, we got to have two tall ones to balance out the short one and was playing formulas. It just works. So
I'm sure we'll see that in The Acolyte when it airs.
The what?
Never mind. I don't want to I don't want to derail us too much. Well,
Stallone's future adventure, but no brown water.
We'll see. Well, guys, on that note, thank you so much for watching this film, for discussing this film, for once again sharing all of your fantastic insights on this, Lou, Lorn. Really appreciate it. I don't think I am pleasantly surprised at how much depth and how well this movie has stood up since the last time I saw it. And surprised, frightened, but it's still an enjoyable movie. I think we've all got a pretty big recommendation on this to go out and see it if you haven't. And when you do go and see it, leave us a comment. Let us know what your thoughts are. Give us your take. Did you like it? Do you think the worst is yet to come in terms of the predictions that it's making? Where do you think they hit the nail on the head? Where do you think they might have missed the mark a little bit? And if you have any suggestions for future films, as always, we would love to hear from them. So give us your comment.
About that, I want to tell everybody a few things. First of all, as you might know, we're so damn popular as members-only things here on the Pro channel that after 2 months of being here exclusively for you who are members, we're going open to the world on the new channel on T3PO. Can I make a suggestion? Kind of keep track of these when you found one you really, really were intrigued by either what we said or what we didn't say, and go back and watch them again when they show up in that other venue, and bring your time and your digestion of what you thought about in the meanwhile to it, and maybe even watch the movie again, even though it's only 2 months, not 2 years or whatever. Because I'd be interested to know how our insights or lack thereof mellow your experience of these movies. And by the way, yes, please keep suggesting movies. Also, please know that although sometimes it doesn't feel like it, we're always trying to make diversity happen in the classic sense. So, for example, next time we're going to a real classic and back to the world of black and white, and a movie that I bet a lot of you have never seen and many maybe are not even aware of. You're certainly aware of the name and the character because it's a famous poem, but it's and now for something completely different, in the classic Monty Python sense. And that's the way we've got it planned out for the next several. We've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 movies set already in our schedule, and more happening all the time. And even this week, I was watching a movie I thought I'd seen, realized I hadn't, had a grand time watching it, and then started looking up, as I often do, the bios of the actors in the movie. And one who I thought very well, and this movie that he made that was one of my real favorites that I had completely forgotten about. So now that's in the rotation too. So it's funny how, the 6 degrees of separation of these things may be a whole lot fewer degrees the further we go. We've already had several movies with the same actors in different situations. Certainly there's no two parts more different than George Segal in Roller Coaster and George Segal in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Very true.
But there they are. And so it's fun to see all this happen this way. Anyway, that's my little speech of the day on our movies and our choices. But go and please buy the damn disc and put it on a shelf and keep it, because when they're putting trigger warnings on classic movies about, this reflects attitudes that may have changed over the years, and we wouldn't want you to be, if you get offended and you don't say something, you'll be fined under the Obscenity Act, 10 credits or whatever. So
enhance your calm, Lou Wasserman's Ghost.
Oh, that too. Yes. Well, happy, joy to you, and to you, Lorn. And don't exchange any fluids with anyone I wouldn't exchange any fluids with.
And on that note, we will see you again in about a week or so. Have a wonderful day, night, wherever you may be, and talk to you soon.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on 23PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.